Hi guys, welcome back to Casting Commons, the show where we talk and discuss everything Pauper. I am your host Teasdale, and this is my co-host, the Tan Tash Warrior himself, Reese.
Hello.
So pal, with our mini hiatus, what have you been up to in the past couple of weeks, I guess?
Yeah, nice to be back.
Oh, definitely.
I think first of all, big thanks to Callie for jumping on with you while I wasn't here. It was nice to actually be able to listen to an episode while I was away.
I bet that was fairly
and not
weird.
have to listen to myself. But yeah, so I've been away, and then the week after you were away.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really got that much Magic in.
Mm-hmm.
I've played with the Lord of the Rings a bit, bought a bit of Lord of the Rings. The set's really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's some standouts for Pauper in there as well, which is cool.
For sure.
I built up Ultratron in paper.
Great.
So that'll be fun next week at F&M. Give that a go, see how that goes. But that's it, really, Magic-wise. You?
Yeah, I didn't really do much to be honest. While you were away, I set myself up to do some recordings. Obviously, still kind of trying to make sure I covered 2 videos a week. So, with the absence of casting commons, I posted a. I did. I post a Ponza like a grill Ponza, and then like a blue red Ponza,
You
and
did
then
the top 5
and
as
then the
well,
top
didn't you?
five as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was basically it. And then after that, my only engagement is I watched Paupergeddon basically on the Sun Lounger, getting sunburned.
Yeah.
That was about it, which was sweet to watch, for sure.
Yeah, it was really good coverage actually. I was quite impressed.
Yeah, definitely.
They definitely put themselves out there a bit more.
For sure. I definitely I really like what I previously over the last few times it's been on. I've definitely watched it. I tend to watch it on like mute because most of the time it was obviously in Italian, and unfortunately I don't speak Italian. But it was great. Pretty much every time I'd say easily 60-70% of the time I was watching, it was all in English as well, so it was really even easier to follow on.
Yeah.
So it was great because obviously they had Gavin on, they had Callie on, they had quite a lot of great names, and it was really great. I think most of the top 8 was in English as well, so it was even great to watch, like a great user experience. So kudos
I
to
think
them.
on that subject, obviously while we've been away, there's been 2 pretty big Pauper paper events. So for this episode, we are gonna cover the challenges from last weekend, but we're just gonna skim over them, and then mostly focus on there was a paper Pauper event at Leeds and Paupergeddon as well. So we're gonna look at those instead.
For sure, it's definitely it's nice to obviously cover other events other than challenges as well, because it shows, as we'll get into, the difference in the metagame as well, which is pretty big.
Definitely.
So, should we go into stuff that everyone's here for? The challenges and obviously the paper events?
Yeah. So our first challenge was Saturday the 17th of June. Fairly standard top 8, I'm gonna say. First was Affinity, second was Mono Blue Fair, third and fourth were Boros Symphony Affinity, and then 5th through 8th was Black Green Gardens, another Mono Blue, a Pingerburn, and Mono Blue Terror, which is probably the outlier there. And then the near misses in 9th and 10th is another Black Green Gardens, and then a Kuldotha burn rather than the Pingerburn. So yeah, I think from there, obviously the main players that you expect, Affinity, Mono Blue, Mono Red, all performing really well, and Gardens as well, continuing to show it is a pretty legit deck at the moment.
I would actually openly say it's definitely up there, and if it's not a tier 1 deck, it's pretty close to a top end tier 2 for sure. It is it's proven time after time that it is. Well, it's been one of the most played decks for the past few challenges previously, and it still shows that it's still putting up a lot of results, to be fair. So
yeah, I think it's quite interesting in the way the lists still aren't really set either.
Yeah.
Every time you see a Gardens list do well, it's different from the last list that did well. Even these lists, the ninth place and the is it top 8 one, and the same. They're very different. So that's interesting to see as well.
Definitely. Another thing I guess to note is Boros Synth, which I guess, without touching on other results that we want to cover, which is obviously after this, there's the Boros Synth deck, which you look at it and you think, with Paupergeddon and obviously the breakout deck there, like you look at it, it's still, you would think, oh, it's just going to be, it's someone testing for Pisa or what have you, and it's just not. It's just like I don't want to say a completely different take, but it's pretty different. It's very, very different. It's how I would imagine Boros Synth was before Batterfist as well.
Yeah.
So, which is definitely an interesting one because it's like Seeker of the Way and
it's like Wedding Invitation and Prismatic Strands, isn't it? Which is a bit of an odd one.
For sure.
No Batterfists at all.
Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting take on it. It's more like an old school Boros Synth, I guess. It's like, I would say this is more of a list roughly when Synth first came out.
Yeah, I guess looking at it, it's sort of edging closer to like White Weenie with just burning. Obviously you've got the 4 Synth, but then basically the red after that is only for Galblast and Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
And then all your threats are white, your removals, journeys, and then you've got your Prismatic Strands as well. Yeah, Wedding Invitation's a bit of a weird one. Obviously it's a bit of a combo with Seeker, but past that I don't really get what it's doing other than sort of a bit of a weird Wellspring impression.
Yeah, it's pretty much, it's like a Wellspring or a Golden Egg kind of slot. And I guess if you're replacing this for a Golden Egg, like, it's pretty similar in a sense. Like, I guess it filters your mana and maybe gain you 3 life, but and then
yeah, probably worse if you expect a lot of burn. But
and you've only got 1 munitions as well for if you were to play Wellsprings. So like I can kind of understand it not being a Wellspring, but then it is a strange one. Definitely stands out, but you're used to only seeing it in like Tyler's Tribe and things like that. So
yeah,
definitely an interesting one. But yeah, definitely a sweet top 8. Definitely nice to see as well. But the Terra deck and the Synth deck kind of bringing some sort of refreshing eyes to it, I guess. The Terra deck's pretty interesting as well. I guess it's pretty similar to the one that we highlighted a couple of weeks back, I think. I think we made it up with the Serpentine curve and things.
Yeah. It might even be the same list, to be honest. But if not, it is very similar. It has got otherworldly gazing, which I can't remember if the other one did. Which is sort of just a way, I guess, turbocharge your terrors out as fast as possible. It doesn't draw cards, but it's pretty close to a card with flashback. But yeah, cool list. It's nice to see it still. Obviously, it doesn't really put up numbers of pilots, but has now top 8'd twice. And there was a couple of other top 32 results as well, if I remember rightly. So, yeah, it's cool to see.
Sure. Yeah, but that seems to be fairly solid top 8. Don't know if you've got anything else to add to it.
No, I think that's probably enough to touch on it as we wanted to. If we move on to the Sunday.
Yeah.
So the Sunday 18th of June. Again, a similar top 8 in the sense of it's got the big players in. So first was Affinity again. Second was Blue Red Fair, this time rather than Mono Blue. Third and fourth was Ponza and another Mono Blue Fair. And then 5th through 8th was Jeskai Wildfire or Jeskai Ephemerate, whatever it's called these days. A Kiln Fiend, which was a bit of an interesting one. Another Affinity and another Ponza. And then the 9th and 10th was a Blue Black Terror and a Pinger Burn getting in there in 10th. Yeah, so more solid results from Affinity, Mono Blue Fair, and Pinger Burn squeezing in the 10th there. but quite interesting to see the blue-red fare do so well.
Yeah, definitely. The blue red one's quite. I guess it's pretty good if you're expecting a lot of fare, but I feel like we have kind of passed that as well, like where mono blue's like completely everywhere. But obviously, I don't have access to the numbers. I haven't seen the numbers on like the percentages and things. But it is an interest. It's pretty good. It's like kind of like hedging against the mirror almost. With obviously having access to like smash to dust, electricity, obviously removal. It's interesting to see that it's as well. Obviously, this is before the new Lord of the Rings set, which obviously you get cast into the fire as well, which is another great addition for the deck. So
it's a huge add that really for the sideboard. But yeah, it was not a wild off the wall blue red fairless. The thing I thought was quite interesting was the Ponder preordain split. It was running two Ponders and a single preordain, which is a pretty peculiar in Pauper. Like usually preordains, especially in phase, chosen quite highly above Ponder. But yeah, it's again cool to see a blue red face sneaking in there.
Yeah, that's is this two disrupts in one copy of disrupt in both top eights as well? Because there's a copy in the mono blue terror and then a copy here. I didn't even know this card existed until I've just read it. It's a pretty cool one. And two vapor snags as well, which is a interesting one as well. Especially when like mono blue's moving away from like snap effects to sometimes run like binder monsters. It's interesting that mono blues kind of went for 4 bolts, 4 scrids, and 2 vapor snags. So interesting. Definitely an interesting take.
Yeah.
Um,
the only other thing I've got on that is the third/4th place Ponza was splashing white, which I haven't really seen done before. Usually, you could either green red Ponza or the rug Ponza. I haven't really, because it was just for a sideboard card and then 4 Goliath Paladins in the main. Is that right?
Yeah, and a Dawnbringer Cleric in the main as well.
Right, okay, so it's a pretty heavy white splash. Running a Timberland Ancient to the Forest Cycle for, I guess, an Arctic Tree line. And then a single Plains. Yeah, it's pretty peculiar.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, but it's odd because obviously we've dubbed this like Ponza without the lack of a better word. It is very much like a Naira initiative, isn't it? Really, it's like because it's kind of went 4 Goliath Paladins, 4 Avenging Hunters, and then it's cut down on the Ponza effects. It only runs 1 Thermal Cast and 3 Acid Moss, which is really odd because obviously the big staying power is the amount of free wins you get from just blowing up people's lands, and it just kind of wants it as an option but doesn't want it to be its main plan. It's just going to
it does have the other 3 Thermocasts in the border as well, so it can like change back into that. But yeah, you are probably right. It's more of a green-white initiative deck running the Aber Elf Utopia Sprawl shell from Ponza. With really light on the Ponza effects.
Yeah. It's quite a weird like hybrid because obviously like the green white there was a green white initiative deck which I think Adapto was running like quite a while ago, and it was like had like Settled Beyond Reality and Ephemerates and things like that. So it kind of was going hard on like flickering the initiative, and it's kind of like a weird in between where it's got the Ponza shell, but it's got also the white splash for a Goliath Paladin and Dawnbringers and such. Yeah, definitely a cool one.
So yeah, have you got anything else to add, or would you like to move on to looking at the paper events?
I think I'm all right. To be fair, that's definitely. I think we've covered enough. Everything was very. I guess. Do you want to talk about the Kiln Fiend? I guess see if there's anything interesting there. Just quickly touch on that.
Yeah. We can look at it. It's always interesting to see Kiln Fiend still existing.
Yeah.
In a world full of Hydroblasts and Bolts. I guess it's got a one-off G2 amplifier, which it's not stock, but it's not sort of unheard of.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's a fairly stock-looking Kiln Fiend, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's looking fairly stock to me as well. It's got 3 lightning bolts in the main. Is that seems a bit, up there, I guess.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And the sideboard is 3 Raise the Effigy, which is a bit of an interesting one. It's an attacking creature, pump spell, or a destroy artifact. But yeah, interesting to see it do so well. Really, it's not the nicest field for it. But I guess if you're on the play against a bunch of Ponza decks, you're probably in for a good time with Kiln Fiend.
Yeah.
They don't have that many answers.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I imagine running a mono blue is pretty rough.
Yeah, I don't know how this beats 8 Hydroblasts when you're only packing 4 Pyroblasts.
Yeah. And it's sort of Pyroblast not really where you want to be in a Kiln Fiend deck either. So it's sort of I guess, a necessary evil to fight the way the meta is shaping up. But yeah, top 8 from Kiln Fiend.
Yeah,
sweet to see. Bit different.
Yeah, I thought we might as well mention it because it isn't something that you see very often. So definitely. Do you want to move on to Leeds?
Yeah, definitely.
So, just for those that want an overview, basically, it's a rapidly growing. The Leeds events are basically they've been done like 2 now, I think, previously, because we've been at 2 of them.
Yeah, so this one we're going to talk about is the third.
Is the third one, and the numbers have just been growing incredibly well. Like, there's a guy who you should all definitely follow on Twitter. He's called Paupergeddon, and he's basically thriving for a community UK based, and he's trying to get everybody together. So ourselves up here, people in Scotland, people in London, people in Newcastle, people all over the spot, basically trying to get them together. Everybody knows when and where Pauper's played throughout the country, and he's trying to get everyone together to obviously play and grow this Pauper community in the UK. So he's doing incredibly well, and it's really nice to see, especially for us who really enjoy Pauper. And we attended the first 2 when he first started out, and the first one had, I think, 27 players, and the second one had 34. Both times, we both went down, and Reese came second in the first one, playing Kuldotha, and he played Kuldotha again and took home the win.
Back-to-back Kuldotthas.
This is what happens when you play to win. But the event, obviously numbers-wise, has done incredibly well. It had 51 players at the weekend, and we believe the next event will have a cap of 64 players with pre-sold tickets, which is also great to see. These are great. These numbers are really obviously really expected. So if you're in the UK, please follow Paupergeddon and check out like all his events because they're all well run. And he also, because he's trying to get everyone to grow, even if an event's ran up in Scotland, up down south or whatever, he links and just talks about all these different events too. So it's great to see. So definitely check him out on Twitter. And that is enough of that plug, I guess, and an explanation of the Northern Pauper Open is. But the top 8, if you would like to cover the top 8, I guess.
Yeah, so it was a really cool top 8. First place was Walls. Second place was Familiars. Third and fourth was an Ultratron and a Mono Blue Fair. And then 5th through 8th was Affinity. What I'm gonna dub Blood Crazed Burn. It's like a more of a classic burn shell running Blood Crazed Goblin. A Mono Black Devotion-ish deck. And then a Familiars with Spellstutter Sprite package.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a pretty open top 8. Again, you're seeing the big players, although it's not a stock burn. There's a burn there, and then an Affinity and a Mono Blue. Obviously the paper hero of Ultratron is there.
Yeah.
Seems to whatever paper event Ultratron does really well.
Yeah.
And then a decent chunk from FAMs as well.
Yeah, FAMS is a surprising one because when we went to the past two events, I don't think there was anybody on familiars. Not that I noticed,
No,
anyways.
I didn't notice any either.
And then for two people to be on basically FAMS ish
In the top eight, yeah.
and top eight is pretty good. So it is a solid deck, don't get me wrong, and it does get better in paper. Similar to Ultratron, obviously has chess clock issues on Magic Online, so generally you'll probably. I personally think Ultratron is probably one of the best decks in Pauper
Yeah.
right now, but it's you don't see it often, and we don't cover it very often. Basically, because it is for a lot of players, unless you're like Cali or whatever, it is hard to play on Magic Online. So
Yeah.
paper it's so much easier.
Yeah, I think if we get more paper results like we have here, we'll see more Ultratron and cover it a lot more. Because like you say, it is probably one of the best decks, sort of on par with the likes of Affinity and Mono Blue. But it's so much harder to play effectively in time on Magic Online. Because even loops, like if you set up an infinite loop, you still have to click through all that to get it to progress. So it just eats up so much time.
But yeah, definitely, it's cool lists to be fair as well. Like going into them roughly, you've got the walls was, I would say, I don't want to say stock, but it was fairly old school. Obviously had a scab, a repository scab, which is a pretty nice combo with the Reaping of the Graves.
Yeah.
You've got the like selection of one elves, one elvish mystic, one finned horn elves, one Lamor elf, all that sort of stuff, and then your standard four of caretakers. So you're not running the Reacher. I can't remember what the Reach elf's called. The Springleaf.
Jespara Sentinels.
Yeah.
It was. I thought it was interesting that it basically forgoes the white in the sideboard completely. So it doesn't run like the Avacyn's Pilgrims or the Jespera Sentinels for the Acolytes, the mono red,
the
like
Crimson Acolyte
guy, Crimson Acolyte. Obviously, I guess he either avoided mono red or was able to play around it quite well, but that does seem like quite a big loss, especially in sort of the meta where we are at the moment. I thought one leaf caller as well was probably lower than we usually see.
Yeah.
But again, that might be I'm not running the white. The sideboard's almost fully mono green. So you maybe don't need to lean on it as hard as the more standard wall decks that we see.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's nice to see Walls do well because Walls is very much it's a solid deck. It's been around for a while and it kind of flickers in and out of doing well, top eights and positions. It's either really well positioned or really horrible, and it tinkers its slots to suit. So it's quite nice to see. Two Crash and Drawbridges was interesting as well. A card that I've never really seen in Walls. It's usually the Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort that generally replaces that. So
yeah, it has the like a one of Rubble Fort as well. Yeah, Drawbridge is an interesting one. Obviously, I guess a 2-mana or 4 that's colourless against something like mono red maybe gives you a bit more game there. Especially if they're more Kuldorfery builds. But yeah, interesting walls list. Obviously not dissimilar to a stock list, but yeah, some interesting choices.
Definitely. And then both both FAM lists look fairly stock as well. Meeting of the Minds, Merchant Scrolls kind of taking a sort of appearance occasionally. Nothing too out there. The loose focus is generally a nod for Cascade, Ponza. Generally, like they've started adding at it just to have it as an out.
Yeah, that's pretty good value. I never thought about that. The Merchant Scroll's quite interesting. I've not seen that before. Obviously, you're a lot more involved in the fans Discord than I am. But yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one, especially with like Meeting of the Minds appearing. Like Merchant Scrolls kind of showed up a bit more in lists as like a one-off, just because it helps with meeting. It's like here with only 3 Meeting of the Minds and 1 Merchant Scroll. It's kind of a fourth meeting of the mind, but then it's also something else if you need it as well. If that makes it, yeah. So it's pretty sweet, to be fair. So that fairly was fairly. I always say stock because it's definitely got interesting card choices. Obviously, gone back to a Stonehorn Dignitary, which quite a few haven't got played since Kuldother's downtrend.
This is the normal fans list, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not the Familiars or whatever. It's yeah.
A lot of cool card choices, to be fair. Like ones that have just kind of been in and out of play. Like obviously you've got the Mnemonic Wall, you've got Essence Scatters and Exclude all in the sideboard. So it's definitely stock-ish, but not too far off the wall either.
Yeah, Exclude's a pretty old school choice. I haven't seen that in quite a while.
Yeah.
I remember playing that in Mono Blue Fear back when it wasn't the biggest menace known to man. The Ultratron list was quite a interesting one as well. Has a Reckless Fireweaver in, which I sort of viewed as a faster win con for Mordor. I guess I wouldn't have thought it was that necessary in paper, but he's got a one of here. Also quite light on the Weather the Storm's main with only 2. Usually it's 3 or 4 in the main, just to cover off that double Swift Spear start.
Yeah. The list's pretty interesting, to be fair. I do agree. They've gone only one Kinsmith as well. I feel like is that the number they've kind of ended on? Like I say, I don't really follow Ultratron too much.
Yeah, from what I've seen, obviously it was quite hyped when it first come out. But you only really need 1 to set your loop off anywhere. And 4 mana is a bit clunky. Especially when you run so few lands. Obviously it's running 17 lands, the 4 of each Tron land, a single swamp, a single polluted mire, and 3 crystal grottos. I guess the swamp is another interesting one because it does run Ancient Stirrings. And along with the Weathers, usually if you've got Stirrings and Weathers, you're probably on a forest. But it's cut down on both of those. It's only on 3 Stirrings and 2 Weathers, so I guess the black is probably slightly more needed.
Yeah, I guess also getting a black generally pseudo gets you a green, like a 1-hit green, I guess, for the most part, if it's a Deadly Dispute.
Yeah, with the disputes. Yeah.
Getting a treasure. But you've obviously got 3 Refractors and also 3 Grottos, so I guess just highly hoping that basically Bargain and Deadly Dispute are just much better than Weather and Ancient Stirrings, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, cool to see. Obviously in paper it does top 8 a lot more than it seems to on Magic Online. Just because it's a lot easier to play in paper.
Yeah.
The Fairies list was a bit more interesting than I expected. Running the 4 of One Mind as the draw spell and the 4 snaps, but with the 2 Cryptomancers. So not going with the Golems or the
Bind the Monsters.
But still having a bit of a different tilt. I'm not really sure what it cut down on mutagenic growths to fit the Cryptomancers in.
I guess that kind of makes sense. It's not free, but still increases toughness and also a protection spell. So I guess kind of. Yeah.
And then its sideboard is fairly stock. A bunch of blasts, some annuls, some relics to hedge the Terra matchup, and then a one-off curfew, I guess, as a sideways hedge against Bogles or similar.
Yeah. Definitely cut down on it looks like steel sabotages that you would usually see in the side, I guess, for that sort of stuff. But yeah, definitely more interesting than normal. I do like Cryptomancer in Fairies, but I don't know if it's better or worse than the Mutagenics or whatever. Definitely a nice one. I wouldn't mind ninjaing back a Crypto.
No, just give you some extra value, I guess. The Affinity list, not a huge amount to say, is fairly stock. It's a 4 Serpent list. Is the main highlighting point. It seems pretty low on the draw twos, I guess. from what I've seen recently, with only 2 Thoughtcasts and 3 Reckoners bargains. A lot of them are up to 10 through 12 draw 2s now.
Yeah.
But past that, it's fairly stock affinity.
Yeah, I'd say looking at this, like I don't know the ins and outs of the card choices, but it looks fairly similar to the 4 month ago Paupergeddon affinity list that was like the first of its thing to go on fog serpents and things like that. That's kind of what it stands out to me as.
Looks I can see that.
But yeah, but again, I guess paper metas kind of might change slow, especially locally, or So I can understand why it kind of is that sort of list. That's what it looks like to me, anyways.
Yeah, definitely. The burn list.
This is the one.
So it's a very weird burn, but nice to see. It's more of sort of an old school burn. With like 4 Serum Blazes, 4 Skewer the Critics, 4 Rift Bolts, 4 Lava Spikes. Interestingly, running 4 Flame Rifts as well, which hasn't seen really that much play in quite a while. But then the star of the show, 4 Blood Crazed Goblin.
Yes.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a 1 red mana for a 2/2 Goblin. And it can't attack unless the opponent has already been dealt damage this turn. So it's essentially a 1 mana 2/2 which relies on you burning your opponent for it to attack. A really interesting choice that I haven't seen before.
No. It is an interesting one, to be fair. I guess the big thing, like, burning someone's face isn't that hard, obviously, for the deck. The deck's stacked with it. I guess my only thing is generally with like burn patterns, apart from playing like Ren's Resolve, generally like in older burn lists, like not older burn lists, the other burn lists, you generally after that you generally want to attack with your Swift Spear and then see what happens before you throw the burn at the face. But obviously with the Blood Crazed Goblin, you kind of want to do that before him. Yeah. But
it obviously it's basically all of its spells are just burn spells. It doesn't run any of the draw 2s. It doesn't even run needle drops.
No.
As like a cantrip. It's basically just hoping to, I guess, jam a guy on turn 1 or turn 2 and then ride it to victory by smashing a lot of burn spells out.
The other interesting thing to me is that this one's baffling to me is I don't even know, Blister Spit Gremlin. That? It's a one of, and it's, for those that don't know, it's a 1 mana 1/1, and it's 1 mana tap, deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, untap the Gremlin. So it's effectively a Thermo Alchemist that costs 1, but it can attack, but then it costs 1 to tap as well.
Ping. Yeah.
So it's a really odd choice compared to Thermo or just Flame Breather in general.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd probably have went with Flame Breather because I can't imagine, it looks pretty tight on mana anyways. So yeah, definitely an interesting one, and it's just hoping that it's just going to burn the opponent quicker than they're going to burn you, because I don't think Flame Rift's very popular at like recent history, because with burn being everywhere, you taking 4 as well as them taking 4 is usually a downside.
Yeah, it's pretty horrendous in the mirror, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm assuming with 4 Fire Blasts, 4 Flame Rifts, you're basically just hoping to fall your opponent much quicker than they're going to fall you to death, I guess.
I imagine 4 Fire Blasts is probably too many for this deck with only 90 mountains and no draw spells. I think I'd probably be on closer to 1 or 2 to free up some slots for the likes of like Needle Drop or probably Needle Drop plays best in this type of build.
I agree.
But yeah. It's a very different list.
Yeah, definitely. Interestingly enough as well, looking at this, no End of Festivities. No. Decides to go 4 Lava Dart in the sideboard as opposed to End of Festivity. Again, another interesting choice.
I can see, with the sort of downtick of Kuldotha, Lava Dart's almost good in like the same against Fae. and the lava darts as well sort of can trigger Blood Crazed Goblin multiple times. As well as Swift Spear, obviously.
Yeah, I guess my only thing is, if you go Lava Dart, your Spell Stutter, your Blood Crazed Goblin can't attack, where we'd end
then you just sack your land and
and
then it can attack.
I know, but you're running 4 Fire Blasts and also 4 Lava Darts with 19 Mountains, so that's but yeah, definitely a cool list anyways, without looking at the nuances of card choices, but it's definitely a sweet burn list, because even without Blood Crazed Goblin, you're probably just going to win games just by Rift Bolt, Searing Blaze, and Skewer the Critics. It'll carry a lot of burn. Yeah, definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, the last one I guess we'll be looking at is this mono black. I'm saying devotion deck. It's not sort of like a classic mono black devotion.
No, but this is a sweet list. This is a weird one that I kind of want to like thing on. Like, I really like this list. It's very odd, some of these card choices, like Murder. Don't get me wrong, that's probably not a card choice I'd choose. Like, there's a lot of different options that I would have over Murder. Is basically the one of that I wanted to. It is a one of Murder. I'm assuming it's basically just a straight up, here's another cast down effectively, but it's 3 mana. But you've got access to Snuff Out, you've got access to Spin and Darkness, you've got access to, there's a 4 mana card, is it Tendrils?
It also just runs 3 Defile. And
that as well. But again, it's mono black devotion list. It's obviously not typical. It's running 2 Deserts, 3 Barren Moors, and a Bajuka Bog, and 3 Mortuary Mires. So, like, it's not even running Witch's Cottage, which was also a swamp. It's just running 12 swamps. So, like, Defile here seems overall pretty bad as well, with the mana base, that is. Because it's not like, it's got 3 Mortuaries Mire, which is also an interesting choice when you do have access to Witch's Cottage anyways. Which doesn't, I guess, when he's only running 12 swamps and 3 Barren Moors, 1 Bajuka, 1, 2 deserts, that the Witch's Cottage isn't going to trigger all the time, I guess. But
looking at the 7 tap lands makes me question the 2 Succumb to Temptations as well.
Yeah.
Which is 1 black instant, you draw 2, lose 2. So surely with that many tap lands, you want the 2 mana ones instead.
Yeah.
Obviously there's 2 Dark Bargains on top of that, which is sort of a similar card. As like your card draw-ish engine. Yeah, but 2 Pestilence, your star of the show is back.
Yes. I do like the idea of the Dark Bind and the Succumb to Temptation in a traditional mono black. I like the idea of it, where obviously you're holding up removal, nothing happens, I get to cast my draw spell. I understand, like, but this one, this list generally looks quite conflicting. It's trying to be like a mono black control deck and the mono black devotion deck, which is more like a tap out control, like usually stalling the board with Combage Witches and, you know, Chitin Rats and all that sort of stuff, which again is another card that's not in this list. It's favoured in Liliana's Spectre, which
I think the Succumb in particular, probably even if you want the instant speed version, that I believe there's just a 2 and a black. You draw 2, lose 2. Obviously you've only got 2 colourless lands, but you do have 2 colourless lands.
Yeah.
So you may as well just play the one that you're guaranteed to cast every time. I'm not entirely sure if there's a reason why it's to come over that. But that would probably be my first change.
But you're running 18 kill spells as well, which will probably carry most of your games, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if that was obviously not including the Pestilence. And
the 4 Guess Verdict in the main's an interesting one.
Fully committed.
It does seem very heavy.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely a cool list. It's kind of mono black devotion-y. You've got 4 Spectres, Liliana's Spectres, which is replacing the Chitin Rats, which is a 2/1 flyer that makes each opponent discard a card. which I don't know if that's better than Chipping Rats. Personally, it's weaker. It does fly.
Yeah, I think with the amount of end the festivities in, obviously not in that one particular mono red deck we've seen, but in mono red in general, and even like munitions and things like that in Affinity, it doesn't seem that much better, or better at all really than Chitter. Witches as well, down to 2 witches in sort of a fairy heavy meta game.
Yeah.
Seems not the greatest.
Yeah, and only 1 Crypt Rats as well, which is, to me, one of the all-stars of Mono Black Devotion, but generally, it's so good right now anyways. Like, look at Gardens, it generally runs like 3. The card's just incredibly well positioned, and then chooses to run 1, and then no Unearths as well, which is usually another combo with Crypt Rats for Mono Black Devotion. I guess the other thing to point out is 3 Garys or Grey Merchant, and no Vampire Sovereigns either to kind of replace that.
Yeah, you are pretty light on the life gain, especially when you're playing things like Feed the Swarm, Dark Bargain, Succumb to Temptation, and Pestilence. You've literally got the 3 Garys. Is that it for the life gain?
Yeah, you've got 2 Tendrils in the board, which again is a lot worse in this particular mono black list because you're only running 12 swamps.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, definitely a sweet one. Sweetest theme Mono Black Devotion because I really do like the deck. I think the deck's really fun to play. Generally, I'm a big fan of combos between Chipping Rats, Garrying people to death. Magic how Richard Garfield intended. But definitely, this list is peculiar and the card choices are definitely interesting. And again, another list that seems quite conflicting overall.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've kind of covered the 8th deck, the 8th place list, which is basically just a Familiars deck with 4 fairies here, 4 spell stutter sprite, and other than that, it is genuinely pretty stock. Like it's just there as an extra counter spell, which gets reduced by Sunscape Familiar. Works with Ghostly Flicker and Ephemera to counter spell. It turns them into counter spells. So
yeah, I think even compared to the second place one, there's not a huge amount really that you wouldn't expect in this.
No, definitely not. I'm surprised both lists ran the Nature's Chant as well. Definitely a old school tech for Affinity when generally Dust to Dust and Revoke are generally better. Like you do get the cost reduction from it being green with the hybrid, but Destroy is just generally a lot worse than Exile.
Yeah.
Because if destroying a Mare Enforcer is infinitely worse than exiling it or a land as well, for sure.
But yeah, so moving on from that, I guess we have picked one deck in particular to highlight.
Yeah.
I guess we've sort of highlighted
them all.
The top 8.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But one outside the top 8 that we both thought was really sweet. And it was Paul Izzard's blue-green Simic Infect.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Basically a really cool blue-green Infect, but also running the Gates package alongside Embiggen, which is something we don't really see because it's not on Magic Online yet.
No, it's not.
It's for anyone who doesn't know, it's a single green mana instant. And it says until end of turn, target non-brushwag creature gets +1/+1 for each super type, card type, and subtype it has. So that, I guess translated, that means basically your Infect guys get +1/+1 for being a creature, and then +1/+1 for each of their creature types. Since I believe March of Machines, but it's maybe a bit earlier when they added Phyrexian as a creature type.
Yeah.
They all now have 3 or an extra creature type on top of what's printed on the card. So on something like a Glistener Elf, then Biggin's basically 1 green mana +4/+4. Same for Ichor and Blighted Agent, 1 mana +4/+4. With essentially no work
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I guess, a groundswell that you don't need to play a land to activate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically all of them are +4/+4 because even the Ichor an artifact creature, Phyrexian Mer. So
Yeah,
it
just
just
the snake. The snake is +3/+3 because it's only a Phyrexian snake.
yeah.
So just creature Phyrexian snake. But yeah, the other 12 creatures, it's 1 mana +4/+4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely pretty cool. And then because of that, because you run the gates and you run Embiggen and Vines, which are the only other pump spells, I guess, generally. But even still, Vines is arguable if it's classed as a pump spell. You generally, from there, because you're running gates, is your main focus is the rest of the spells are protection. So it runs like 4 Apostles' Blessing, 4 Vines of Vastwood, and 3 Shore Ups, which are all protection spells. And then after that, it runs 3 Rancor, 4 Distortion Strikes, which are basically just evasion.
Yeah.
So, which are mainly just for your Glistening Elf, your non-blighted agent creatures, I guess.
It does seem like, yeah, like you're touching on there, from running the gate package, you can trim on the random pump spells that you would use to have to play in Infect.
Mm-hmm.
And focus more on protection and like evasion.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it really cool deck. The sideboard, nothing out of the ordinary. A couple of dispels and a couple of spell pierce. Some nature's claims and a serene heart for artifacts and enchantments. A couple of torment scripts for terror. A couple of weathers for mono red, and then I guess the interesting package is 2 experimental augury and 2 prologue to Phyresis.
Yeah.
As like cantrip, card draw, but also give poison counter spells.
Mm. Definitely just, it's kind of like your burst damage, I guess, is one way of looking at it. Just get you over the edge if, the decks have a lot of removal or the Stonehorn dignitaries or whatever. Kind of get you going with the prologue and also can end the game with the auguries and stuff. It's definitely an interesting one for sure. I guess the only thing that strikes me as odd is, interestingly enough, they don't class mutagenic growth as like a protection spell like it is in, say, fairies, which again is another interesting one. Like I would personally probably have that in here, but
Yeah,
especially with all the X1 hate, because it seems it's free. It's also another thing, and you're running a lot of tap lands. So if you can't generally play a Glisten Elf till turn 3 for the most part with all your gates, I guess. If you go tap gate, you can't protect it at any point until turn 3.
I guess all I can really think of is it doesn't really add up very well with the other pump spells. So you've got your 4 Embiggen and your 4 Vines that are both +4/+4. And then there's 3 Rancors as like a more permanent pump, but by that there's sort of nothing, like you're not really getting to 8.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see mutagenic being worthwhile. I don't know how much you need the 3 Rancors with 4 Distortion Strikes as well, but I guess they are pretty powerful with Basilisk Gate.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely interesting. Like it could be just a space issue, and generally the hard protection and going a lot slower because you are slower anyways with the gates. So maybe that's just kind of rounded off.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's just kind of there's no space for it. But that was the first thing that jumped at me is no mutagenics. I guess the rest of the pump spells, is it the Seal of Strength and Might of Old Corrosive and all that sort of
like Landmark Augur and stuff like that.
Yeah, all that's fine. Like, it's just generally chaff of old school. Infect and the Gates is definitely a good addition to that to free up so much space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet one.
Do you want to move on to Paupergeddon?
The Pierre de Resistance. This is definitely what we're after. So for those that don't know, Paupergeddon is, I'm gonna just dub this. It's the World Cup of Pauper. It is the biggest Pauper event generally of the year, and no matter which one is, the massive. There's 3. I believe there's 3 held every year. It could be 4. I'm not entirely sure, but they are basically in different locations around Italy. The previous one was in Lecker, I believe, without pronouncing that terribly wrong, probably. I'm sure that's where the last one was. And then this one was in Pisa. They have insane attendance, like almost old school GP levels. This one had 481 players in a 2-day main event. The Lecker, I believe, had 600 odd players. So the absolute numbers are phenomenal. And Alessandro and all the team are doing insanely well with this. And it is just definitely just one of the pinnacles of pop. People who are interested in Pauper just are definitely there. It's one thing it is on our list. We will eventually get there. Hopefully. Life and all that. What can I say? But yeah, that's basically Paupergeddon. We definitely want to get there, and I'll let you take it away with the top 8.
Yeah. Again, another pretty cool top 8. It's less varied than we've seen in the previous results. But interestingly, Lord of the Rings was legal. So that sort of has some lean on what did well and what was sort of a breakout deck. So first place, Affinity again. Is that three first place, the 2 challenges and then Paupergeddon. Second place, Ultratron. Obviously another good showing in a paper event. Third and fourth was another Affinity and a Boros Synth. And then 5th through 8th was 2 more Boros Synths, another Affinity, and a Mono Blue Fair. Yeah, obviously if Affinity shown, it is still probably the best deck in Pauper. They keep banning cards, but the cards they ban don't really matter because they're not bridges. So yeah, it's still you ban a card, it just replaces it with something else, or Wizards print something else to replace it. But for the tournament in general, I think Boros Synth is probably
definitely the
most
breakout
talked about deck.
100%. I'm just trying to find the meta analysis as well,
yeah.
which.
But yeah, rocking Lambus bread from Lord of the Rings. In I think all the Boros Synth lists in the top 8.
Bar Mengu's list, which was the 5th place.
Or did he not play any?
No, he played 0.
That's disappointing. But yeah, Lambus was probably one of the more talked about cards. Which for anyone who hasn't seen the new Lord of the Rings cards, it's sort of like a Golden Egg Ica Wellspring type card. It's 2 mana artifact, food. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 1 and draw a card. You can pay 2 and sack it like a food to gain 3. But when it's put in to your graveyard from the battlefield, you shuffle it back into your deck. So it's like a Ica Wellspring Golden Egg that you can rebuy. And I think the scry as well, like the ETB scry 1 draw card, is like so much more powerful than just blind draw.
Yeah.
I think that's the main takeaway from that.
Yeah. I think most of the lists were on like 2, I believe, maybe 3. I could be wrong. Was like the starting point.
So one of them in the top 4 was on 4.
Yeah. So that was on 4.
The
4 and 1 Wellspring. And then
that was Mengu's was on 0. And the other one was on 3.
3, yeah. Because I believe Mengu's wrote an article on his deck and how he got to the choices. The original deck had, I believe, 2 and 3 barbed Batterfists and 3 Wellsprings. I think was like the starting point because they had to test, obviously, knowing that Lord of the Rings was going to be legal. And overall, he said he preferred Wellspring, but he's unsure if that's the correct choice because he liked it with all the sacrifice things like munitions and Foundry Helix. But he can, he wasn't really sold on either way. So I believe with everyone saying how well it did, the Lambas, I can understand it being 100%. With a bit more tuning, I think it'll be a 4 of in the Boros Synth list moving forward. Another, I guess it's also a 4 of in the Ultratron as well. 4 of in the Ultratron. 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 4 of in the Ultratron
Yeah.
Which is again another deck where it just is insane. It's so much better, I guess. When you're also churning through your deck as well with Ultratron, probably a bit more too. So
Yeah.
the
Do you want to go through? Do you think if we go through I guess the non-Boros decks,
yeah
Boros Synth decks, as we're going to highlight as our spoiler for further ahead, the deck we're going to highlight is the Boros Synth, just in general as an overview. So I think if we start by going through the other decks,
Yeah.
which I guess is three Affinity, an Ultratron, and a Mono Blue.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just go through. Do you want to just highlight Affinity as a whole? Just go through Affinity and then see if there's any major differences between the lists. Or
Yeah, definitely. So the first place Affinity was a Frogmite build. As I touched on before, playing a lot of draw twos. I think it's got 11 out of the 12 with only 3 Reckoner's Bargain. Bar that, it's a fairly stock list. There's nothing too spicy. I guess one Mag Angler in the main, because it's not playing Serpents. The other 2 Affinity decks, one was playing Frogmites, again one Mag Angler. The draw 2s in this one was on 10. So 4 Deadly Spirit, 4 Reckoner's Bargain, 2 Thoughtcasts. Couple of Rebukes, couple of Spell Bombs in the main.
Yeah. Cuts 2 Spell Bomb, cuts 2 Chromatic Stars from pretty much from the other list. It looks like there's 1 less Frogmite for another Kenku and 2 less stars for 2 Spell Bombs, roughly. With the draw spells as well.
And then the final one again on Frogmite, 3 Frogmite. This one's on Gearseeker Serpents, 2 Kenku, 2 Gearseekers. A 1 of Spell Bomb again in the main. And a couple of Rebukes, and then draw 2s. I think this one's on N8 as well. Yeah, 4 Bargain, 4 Dispute, 2 Thoughtcasts. Barring those, there's not huge amounts of sort of new innovation or tech. There's no Somber Halberguards, anything like that. It's 1 of Turn Aside in the sideboard of this third one, which is, it's not stock, but you see it occasionally.
Yeah, just anti-dust to dust tech, really. I believe, right? Yeah. And then there's 1 of Cast into the Fire in the second one as well.
Yeah, the top 4.
Yeah.
The top of the top 4. Yeah, there's one Casting at Fire, which I guess is another card we'll probably touch on in the Boros overview. So the second deck, or the second place deck, was an Ultratron. This to me is quite a cool version of Ultratron. It's again cutting down on the weathers, but it runs a teachings package. And then goes hard on the 4 Ancient Stirrings and 4 Lambas spread. Or I guess it's just called Lambas, isn't it? Cutting down on the Wellsprings. Still 2 Wellsprings. So not cutting it completely, but yeah, 4 Lambas, 4 Ancient Stirrings. Drumming on Golden Foundries because you're going to find them more easily. And then the teachings package to pick up things like weather, like dispute, like bargain.
But then you get a lot of access to a lot of different stuff in the sideboard too, which is quite nice. Opens up a lot of space. Just as a one-off teachings is pretty nice.
Yeah, it means things like your Serene Heart, your Breath Weapon, your Scatter Shot in the sideboard, even Ancient Grudge, you've got a lot more access to. Yeah, again, we've touched on it already. Ultratron in paper is the real deal. It's one of the best decks in Pauper.
Yeah, it won the last Paupergeddon as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a powerhouse for sure.
I was watching the top 8. I was like, are we gonna get another Ultratron victory?
We were not quite there, unfortunately.
But no, not quite. And then I guess the final non-Boros list was the Fair list. There's nothing too out the ordinary. There's a couple of preordains and a force spike instead of what a brine barrow, a mutagenic, and a of one mind.
Yeah.
Barring that, it's a fairly stock fair, or I guess snap brine barrow fair.
Yeah.
Bunch of blasts in the side, bunch of annuls, couple of spire golems, which I guess you don't see that often in the side anymore, but just pretty good in the mirror.
Yeah.
And then some relics to hedge against the like Terra-esque matchups.
Ultratron, I guess, as well. Would it been an actual thing in paper?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, definitely.
Is there anything you want to touch on from them?
No, I do like the Tom Ross special of the one of Force Spike. I just love those kind of one of gotcha cards that you get them someone on turn one and you just haunt the rest of their event. They're just constantly playing.
They have to play around it for the rest of the games as well.
It's just like, yep, that's it. All you need is the one. Yeah, no, I think I guess before we highlight the Boros deck, I guess roughly, the numbers on the event, because obviously there's quite a lot of players, and the most played deck was Mono Blue Fair at 13%, and it only had one top 8. It was definitely, I'd say, one of the underperformers for sure with that many players. I think it kind of worked out like 60 odd players playing fairies, and only one of them managed to top 8. And I don't think there was that many in the top 16 from memory. Yeah, and then after that, your next two decks were Pinger Burn and Boros. And Boros Synth was definitely a deck that people were obviously testing. I don't want to say in the background, but it kind of feels like that, because it was a deck before Lord of the Rings set came out. Boros Battlefist was kind of and it's definitely not. I haven't really seen any refined lists since. Here's the new card. Here's Bab Battlefist, and it's definitely the breakout deck of the tournament for sure. Gardens as well was another. I'd say definitely another underperformer for sure.
Yeah.
It was I don't know. It was tied for the fourth most played deck at 7%, and I think it had one in the top 16. So it definitely wasn't. But again, it's probably got the issue, as we've mentioned, that there's no refined list. All the lists are all over the spot. So that not only is that difficult for your opponent to play around what you could have, it's just it's hard for you to work out which cards are just the best ones to go for. So is Guild Swarm Prowler better than Lamor Visionary? Is Fungal Infection better than Suffocating Fumes? It just leads a lot more messing around when you've got a test for such a large event like this. But I'm not going to go through the whole percentages, but those are the kind of ones I would want to highlight. Also, I guess if you don't class Pinger Burn and Kuldotha Burn as two separate decks, as you class them as one whole, this is mono red, it was the most played deck at basically 8% and 7%. Personally, I think you approach them generally the same with slight differences. So I personally would class them as two different decks anyways. But just to note, there was 8% and 7%, 8% Pinger Burn, 7% Kuldotha, and Kuldotha was the highest, I believe. I think it came 9th. I think it was. It was in the top 16, and there was only one copy, I believe. I think after that, the only Kuldotha S card was someone was playing Kuldotha in Mogwarts or Goblin combo. But yeah.
What was the percentage of affinity out of interest?
Percentage of affinity was 7%. So you had 8% of Boros Synth and 7% at affinity. They worked out at roughly 33 pilots for affinity and 38 pilots for Boros Synth, and you had 3 of each in the top 8.
So I guess really looking at that, then what you would expect to be the top decks were all fairly similar in numbers.
Yeah.
like a few more pilots for mono blue, but it's not miles away. So it does seem pretty balanced. I know from looking at them numbers, there was quite a large percentage of uncategorized decks as well.
Yeah, 15%.
Which are just which are like brews and things of that nature, which is great to see as well.
Yeah. The only thing that was surprising to me was the low percentage of Ultratron. That was the only one, which was 4%. So that's the only thing that was quite surprising to me, because generally going into this, I would have thought Ultratron would have been one of the decks to have an eye on, because it's definitely a deck that is incredibly strong. Does really well generally in paper events. And I would have thought with a tournament this competitive, people would have been more on it, but clearly other decks were better picked, I guess.
Do you want to move on to talking about the Boros Synth deck overall, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So Boros Synth is a deck, as we touched on earlier, that has been around since Experimental Synthesizer, and it was generally, like we seen in the first challenge, it was like a Seeker of the Way, Prismatic Strands-esque kind of deck, and it gained value off Experimental Synthesizer and Core Skyfisher / Glinthawk, using those to kind of do that, gain some card advantage there. And it kind of got new toys with Barbed Batterfist, which for those that don't know is from All Will Be One, and it is a 1 and a red for an equipment, which has 4 Mirrodin, which is similar to Living Weapon, but when it comes into play, it makes a 2/2 and then attaches the equipment to it. And a quick creature gets +1/-1, and it has an equip cost of 1. So effectively, you make a 2/2 that is basically a 3/1, which is obviously very aggressive. And then if you bounce the equipment, you still keep the 2/2. So your value engine, your experimental synthesizer engine, makes threats, which it didn't do before All Will Be One, really.
Yeah.
And also the equipment, if your 2/2 dies, your equipment can easily go on basically every creature you have. You can turn your Core Skyfisher into a 3/2 or your Glinthawk into a 3/1, and they both fly. So you're obviously gaining a lot more you're having a lot more power on the board, which to me also allows you to be a lot more aggressive, which you can see by most of these lists running Galv Blast, Lightning Bolt, and Foundry Helix. So that's a general overview of the deck, and I think going forward, this is definitely going to be one of the decks, especially with how well it's done in Paupergeddon. I think it's probably going to be one of the decks to beat, not just because of new toys, but it genuinely is a strong deck. And Core Skyfisher, Glinthawk, Experimental Synthesizer engines have been pretty good and going under the radar for probably quite some time now. And
I think Skyfisher in general is probably just the best statted body in Pauper right now on curve. Like 2 mana, 2/3 flyer is surprisingly hard to deal with. It stops a lot of attackers. It dodges a lot of removal. And can attack through a lot of things. And obviously you've got the Batterfist value off that. And I think just the gain of these type of decks, from the Lambus, from the Cast Into the Fires from Lord of the Rings, and even we didn't see it in this tournament, but I've seen people testing the new Shrapnel Blast card. I'm not sure what it's called.
Improvised Club.
Yeah, it's based from Lord of the Rings as well. It's 1 red instant, and you sack an artifact or creature, deal 4 damage to any target. So when you're gaining Lembus and Cast Into the Fire, that are really premium, I would say, Pauper cards, and then maybe even this makeshift club, it's a big injection of not only power but interest into the archetype.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there is. I could see it easily replacing Foundry Helix. There is pros and cons to both, for sure. Gain and life, being multicolored are both 2 big pulls for Foundry Helix.
Yeah.
Obviously, costing 2 is the biggest pull for improvised club. I think it's called. I'm going to find out the name of this card.
Yeah, I think you're right. Basically, costing 2, being able to fire it off earlier, like sacking a Simf if you need to, or a Lambus, and the Lambus getting shuffled back in, is a big deal.
Definitely.
3 mana in a deck that essentially, I think, Foundry Helix is the only 3-drop.
Yeah.
Everything else is 2 or less.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to keep the full deck at 2 or less means you can run pretty lean on your mana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's definitely a great card. It's a card that hasn't really seen much play, and in this deck it definitely shines for sure. Being able to kill the Guardians is a big thing, especially in bigger events where you expect core gate and stuff. But if you don't expect a lot of burn and a lot of core gate, which again could just be a local meta, I'd 100% be on improvised club because it's just cheaper and it does basically the same thing. I guess the other main difference between these lists, I guess, is it the garrisons I wanted to touch on?
Oh, the Boros garrisons.
Yeah.
That's in the Marco Casotto list. And a Warhol campus and 2 Boros garrisons.
And Mengu, I think, was on 2 as well. But the 4th.
IA has 2 garrisons as well.
But the 3rd place list was on basically 0. It was on just 3 bridges, 3 dens, 3 furnace, 4 crags, and then some basics. Like, I do think Boros Garrison in general is a pretty solid one. Allows you to run lower land, like not lower land count, but basically keep lower land hands, because obviously it's, as people will know, Karoo lands are just great in Pauper, especially for a deck like this where you're going slow. I'm definitely a big fan of garrisons for sure.
I think interestingly in this case, the 2 decks that ran the garrisons actually run 21 lands, and the other one ran 20.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can sort of see it, especially with the Foundry Helixes. I believe both of those ran more Foundry Helixes.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they both ran 2 rather than the singleton.
Yeah.
I think for me, I imagine this deck's going to stay a lot lower to the ground and not going to run garrisons, especially with the sort of amount of Ponza that's about at the moment. It's just not really a risk that you need to be taking. And you can just keep a really clean mana base.
I guess the big difference is probably the differences in the formats. So this deck transitioning to Magic Online is just going to be in a field of Ponza, which even little things like the 3rd place list running 3 Rust Veils and 4 Windscarred Crags. I imagine if that was on Magic Online, it would transition the other way around, just because it's free enough. And all that sort of thing. So like going lower to the ground, exactly as you say, goes under Ponza a lot better than like the other lists that went 21 lands with double garrison and all that sort of stuff.
I think the last thing I've got to mention on these really is one thing they all had in common is they had 4 cast into the fire somewhere in the 75.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably, alongside Lambus, is a huge addition to Pauper as a whole. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's a 1 red instant. And it's modal, so you either deal 1 damage to up to 2 target creatures, or you exile target artifact. So it's something that you can put in the main deck, and it has multiple uses against different decks. So against Affinity, you can plug lands. Against Ultratron, you can disrupt them. Or against Fey, you have the mod, you can ping down the guys. But especially as a sideboard slot, it's so versatile. It gives you a lot more room in your sideboard. You don't have to be running things like End of Festivities or Electricary, because your artifact removal now does that as well. I think it's probably going to be one of the most influential cards we get to Pauper. Hopefully for a long time, because I think if they start printing Cast of the Fire level cards every set, we may be in trouble. But it's a huge addition to the format.
I think the thing is, one thing that's definitely quote unquote been banned for a long time in Pauper is sideboard. Generally, you have, joking aside, you have basically 15 cards in your sideboard, and 12 of them will be automatically closed out for 8 or 6 cards for this, 6 cards for that. You've got 3 card sideboard slots to mess about with, all that sort of stuff. Because nowadays, with the power level of Pauper, like 4 Weather the Storm or 4 Crimson Acolytes or Arishing Clerics just isn't going to cut your burn matchup. You can't just add 2 or 3 sideboard slots for burn and that's it sorted. The decks are so powerful that same is true for Dust to Dust Revoke and now Cast into the Fire. Like, these cards are just so, you need more than one. Like, the first Dust to Dust slows them down, this third one probably kills them. Like, it's to that level of absurdity that these 15 card sideboards, so cards like Smash to Dust, cards like Cast into the Fire, are great for Pauper because they open up your sideboard cards slots, and both effects being so relevant. They help with Kuldotha, they help with Fairies, and they also help with Affinity, which are 3 of the top decks in the format. Noticeably as well, all 3 lists ran more than just the 4 Cast into the Fires for Affinity as well. Like, the card is good, don't get me wrong, but as just said there, you can't just go, here's 4 Cast into Fires, I've helped with my X1 matchup, and also I've helped with Affinity. Like, the 8th place runs 2 Revokes, Mengu's list runs 2 Revokes also, and I think the other one runs 2 Dust to Dusts.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Which is quite funny since that's the one that runs the least lands and also then runs the most expensive one, but hey-o.
And then did the best.
Yeah. Power of Dust to Dust.
Yeah.
But yeah, the card is incredible, and so is Lembas. Definitely seems like a sweet addition too. Obviously, that one's a lot closer than just it fits in this slot, but Cast in the Fire definitely standout card of the event and of Lord of the Rings set for sure for Pauper.
Yeah,
it was definitely looks strong when you look at it initially, and it to me, watching it over the weekend, it just overperforms what you think it does. For sure. I guess the other thing, to me is don't underestimate the power of Barb Batterfist as well. As much as I looked at it and I thought when All Will Be One first came out, and I wasn't really high on this card, I thought it was okay. Like, it's a 2-mana 3/1. Like, how good's that? But when you're making 4 of them and the other 3 are leaving 2/2s behind, and you know, it's just so strong. And then if they then kill the 2/2 or the 3/1 later on in the game, every threat you play, like you play a Core Skyfisher, you can slam 2 Barb Batterfist onto it, and you know it's still surviving, and you're hitting for 4.
I think as soon as you cast it, cast the glint or pick up the equipment, and then replay the equipment, you sort of see how good it actually is.
Yeah.
Like you say, late game, you have a Barb Batterfist sat in play, nothing else. You rip a Glinthawk, you've now got a 3/1 and a 2/2 off 1 draw.
The real deceiving thing about these decks, similar with Mardu Synth previously and Boros Synth now, is they are so low to the ground with basically only having 1 to 2 3-drops being the Foundry Helix, which again, depending on your meta, is a questionable choice if you want that or the new Improvised Club. Having only 1s and 2s looks like, oh, it's just an aggro deck. Like, do not be fooled. This deck can go toe-to-toe with any card advantage. Yeah. Core Skyfisher, an experimental synthesizer, is an incredibly powerful engine that looks deceptively like okay, but it's incredibly strong.
Yeah.
For sure.
But yeah, Paupergeddon, mint event overall. Great to watch.
Oh yes.
Cool to see these innovations. Cool to see the new Lord of the Rings cards taking shape. Mm-hmm. I believe they're on Magic Online now, so this weekend's challenges we'll probably see them. So I imagine we'll go over them next episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think to sort of finish us off, as I feel like we've run on quite long.
Yeah.
we have some expectations of how Pop will shake out following these events.
Mm-hmm.
I think my first one is the most obvious take, that this new version of Boros Synth with Lambus, with Cast into the Fire, will take off and be very popular. I don't think that's a pretty. It's not a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a fairly obvious one. It's a deck, especially in stuff like leagues. You can run it out very quickly. And in challenges, you can take on a lot of different decks and be able to have tools to fight them.
Sure.
So I imagine we'll start seeing that crop up a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. I think my take is kind of following that as well, which I believe fairies will probably naturally start taking a downward turn. It was the most played deck at Paupergeddon, and I probably imagine it has a terrible Boros Synth matchup anyways, plus Cast into the Fire just makes it even more horrendous. That I feel like with this deck taking a natural uptrend, fairies will just naturally go down. It just can't. I don't think it has a way to compete. So
yeah, I think especially if the Boros Synth decks start a run, Cast into the Fire is in the main. When the fairies decks are trying to get ninjas through random 2/2s on the ground and fairies flew through 2/2s and 2/3s in the air, as well as just getting 2-for-1 constantly, it's not going to have a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
My second one was that Affinity, obviously, is constantly proven it is the best deck in Pauper still. I imagine more people will now pick that up again. After seeing how well it's done. It obviously came first in both those challenges, and put huge numbers into the top 8 of Paupergeddon,
including another win as well.
Yeah, so I can definitely see more people picking up Affinity and doing well with it.
Yeah, it's a strange one because nothing's really changed. It's got nothing new. In actual fact, it's got worse in the sense that Lord of the Rings has released another hate card for it.
Yeah.
But the deck's still a powerhouse, and there's no real. I don't really understand why. Like as we've spoke about in previous episodes, why it's took such a low hit. Like there's very few pilots still put up results, but it still didn't get popular again, and I don't know why. But hopefully, this giant event with Affinity taking a resurgence might actually make people realize actually, even though there is Dust to Dust, there is Cast into the Fire, there is Revoke, it is still a strong deck.
Yeah, I feel like people probably just got bored with it.
Yeah.
Obviously, you see the grinders who specialize in Affinity playing it every week and doing well with it every week. But you generally don't see that huge amount of numbers. But something like an event like this can bump up those numbers.
Yeah. I guess my last take's not really a hot take, not really a crazy take. I think it's just more looking and reviewing the mid-range piles, which kind of fit into. I don't want to say Ponza because Ponza's a weird one that I wouldn't really class as a mid-range deck, but mainly like the Black-Green Gardens, the Black-White Initiative, that sort of slot, which has done quite well in Pauper recently, obviously with Black-Green Gardens' success. I believe they'll probably start to change and probably favour more Black-White in the coming weeks. Probably not next week, like the immediate future, but I'd say in the near future when people realise like Gardens looks like it would struggle against Synth. Like I haven't played it personally, but it looks like that. It kind of feels like it can't keep up really well with the Synth Core Skyfisher engine. It can't keep up with the amount of burn it has. It can't keep up with the amount of pressure it can make with Batfist. It just generally seems like it'll probably overall have a bad time. Where I feel like Black-White Initiative or the Black-White deck might have a better, or most likely will have a better matchup. It's got flyers. It has the initiative, which it can then defend quite well. It has Vampire Sovereign too, which can kind of give it the life gain to protect itself with the ephemerates and such. And also has I wouldn't say a better affinity matchup, but it has access to better affinity hit in the form of Dust to Dust. So I could see that more likely being, that's kind of my take, is that Black-White will kind of overtake the popularity of Black-Green Gardens, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
So Anything else we'd like to add before we call it?
No, I think we've went on long enough with this one. I think obviously next week we'll be a bit more back to normal at our regular run time.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thanks for coming back to us after a short hiatus. We will, as Rita said, be back to normal, checking out challenges from next week. So that is all from us at Casting Commons, and until next time, don't forget to stay hydrated.
Bye.